The mark of the beast already exists. They only changed the name Revelation, the series. In 2025, more than 5 billion people on the planet carry in their pocket a device capable of tracking every step, every purchase, every conversation. No one forced anyone to accept it. There was no decree. There was no military imposition. People simply adopted it with enthusiasm. Now imagine that nearly 2,000 years ago, a man exiled on an island in the middle of the Aegean Sea described exactly this scenario. He did not call it technology. He called it a mark. And what he saw in that vision still frightens those who read the 13th chapter of Revelation. His name was John. He was not just any visionary. He was the last of the 12 original disciples of Jesus still alive. A man who walked beside the Messiah, who heard his voice firsthand, who was present at the crucifixion when all others fled. At that time, John was approximately 90 years of age. The Emperor Domitian, who ruled Rome between the years 81 and 96 after Christ, had exiled him to the island of Patmos, a piece of volcanic rock in the Aegean Sea, with less than 35 square kilometers in extension, smaller than many neighborhoods in a large city, a place of forced isolation, reserved for political and religious prisoners whom Rome wanted to silence. But Rome made a miscalculation. It thought that isolation would silence the apostle. What happened was the opposite. On that island, far from everything and everyone, John received the most detailed revelation about the future of humanity ever recorded in any sacred text. The book of Revelation, from the Greek apocalypsis, which means simply revelation or unveiling, contains 22 chapters, 404 verses, and about 12,000 words in the original Greek text. Each of them is loaded with images, symbols, and warnings that have crossed nearly 20 centuries and continue echoing today with a precision that disturbs even the most skeptical. And of all the chapters of this extraordinary book, none has generated more debate, more fear, and more fascination than chapter 13. It is there that the beast appears. It is there that the number appears, and it is there that the mark appears. Think about what John saw. Revelation 13 verses 16 and 17 says the following, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." These words were written in a time when commerce was conducted with bronze and silver coins, in a time when the greatest tracking technology available was a wax seal on a document, in a time when the idea of controlling every transaction of every living person on the planet was as absurd as saying that men would fly through the skies. But observe carefully what the text describes. It is not a suggestion, it is not an invitation. The verse says, "He causeth all," everyone, without exception, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave. No one would escape, and the mechanism of control was not military. It was not direct violence, it was economic, that no man might buy or sell. The power of the mark does not come from swords. It comes from access. Either you accept it or you are outside the system, without food, without shelter, without medicine, without economic existence, total exclusion. For centuries, theologians and scholars racked their brains trying to understand how it would be possible to implement such a system, a mechanism that would literally reach every person in the world, that would control every commercial transaction, that could be applied to the hand or the forehead, that would be universal. Until 100 years ago, this was technically impossible. Until 50 years ago, it was improbable. Until 20 years ago, it was difficult. Today, it is not only possible, it is already being tested. In some places, it is already functioning. Let us begin with the nervous system of everything, money. Because if the mark of the beast is about controlling who buys and who sells, the first logical step is to control the medium of exchange itself. And that is exactly what is happening now with the so-called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. It may seem like an inoffensive technical name, but measure what this represents in practice. A CBDC is a currency issued and controlled directly by the government of a country, but which exists only in digital format. It is not like a common bank transfer, where the bank is the intermediary. It is the central bank itself, the supreme monetary authority, that issues, tracks, and, if necessary, blocks every unit of currency in circulation. Every cent has a code. Every transaction has a record. Every person has a complete spending profile visible to the state. Does it sound like fiction? China has already implemented it. The digital yuan, officially called eCNY, began being tested in 2020 in 4 cities. In 2024, it was already present in more than 26 provinces and regions, with more than 260 million active digital wallets. The volume of transactions exceeded the mark of 7 trillion yuan, the equivalent of more than $980 billion. In Shenzhen, a city with more than 17 million inhabitants, public employees already receive part of their salary in digital yuan. In Suzhou, transport subsidies are paid exclusively in this currency. Paper money has not been banned, yet, but the infrastructure to replace it completely already exists. And it is not just China. The European Central Bank is developing the digital euro with a launch forecast between 2025 and 2026. The project has already passed the investigation phase and entered the preparation phase in October of 2023. In Brazil, Drex, the Brazilian version of digital currency, is in an advanced stage of testing, with more than 16 financial institutions participating in the pilot coordinated by the central bank. Nigeria launched the Naira in 2021, becoming the first African country to have an operational CBDC. India tested the digital rupee with more than 5 million transactions in the first months. In total, according to the Atlantic Council, more than 130 countries, representing 98% of global GDP, are researching, developing, or have already implemented some form of state digital currency. 130 countries. But here is the detail that changes everything. Unlike paper money, a CBDC can be programmed. This means that the government can define automatic rules about how, where, and when you spend your money. It can determine that certain amounts can only be spent on food. It can block purchases of certain products. It can establish expiration dates for the money. If you do not spend it by a certain deadline, it disappears. It can limit the geographical area where the money works. And naturally, it can turn off any person's access to the system with a single command. This is not a conspiracy theory. Agustin Carstens himself, general manager of the Bank for International Settlements, the so-called Bank of Central Banks, publicly declared in 2021 that the fundamental difference between a CBDC and physical money is that the central bank would have absolute control over the rules and regulations that determine the use of that currency, in addition to having the technology to enforce that. These are the words of the man who coordinates global monetary policy, not of a conspiracy theorist. Now reread Revelation 13, verse 17, that no man might buy or sell. Can you see the structure? The mechanism described by John nearly 2,000 years ago did not need chains nor guards on every corner. It needed a system where economic access could be turned on or off by a central authority. Exactly at how a CBDC works. But digital money alone is not enough. For control to be total, the system needs to know who each person is. It needs a unique, universal, verifiable, and preferably biometric identity. And this is where the second pillar of what may very well be the skeleton of the mark enters. Digital identity. Think of the scale of what has already been done. India created the largest biometric identification system in the world. It is called Aadhaar. Each citizen receives a 12-digit number linked to their fingerprints, iris scan, and facial photograph. In 2024, Aadhaar covered more than 1,380,000,000 people, approximately 94% of the Indian population. This number is used for everything: opening a bank account, receiving government benefits, buying a SIM card, accessing health services. Without Aadhaar, the Indian citizen is, for all practical purposes, invisible to the state. But how does it work in daily life? A person who wants to buy a SIM card in India needs to authenticate their Aadhaar. Whoever wants to open a bank account needs to link it to Aadhaar. Whoever receives any government subsidy, food, cooking gas, education allowance, needs Aadhaar so that the deposit can be made. The system has authenticated more than 100 billion transactions since its launch. 100 billion. It is as if every person on Earth had used the system 12 times. 1,380,000,000 identities. One database. India is not alone. The European Union approved the eIDAS 2.0 regulation in 2024, which obliges all 27 member countries to offer a digital identity wallet to citizens by 2026. This wallet will store identity documents, driver's licenses, diplomas, medical prescriptions, and bank data, all in a single application on the cell phone. Estonia has already operated a digital identity system since 2002, used by 99% of the population to vote, pay taxes, and sign contracts. Singapore, Australia, Canada, and dozens of other countries are in advanced stages of implementation, but perhaps the most revealing project is ID 1320, a global alliance launched in 2016 with the declared objective of providing digital identity for every person on the planet. Among its founders and partners are Microsoft, Accenture, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Gavi organization. The Global Vaccine Alliance. The ID 2020 manifesto states that digital identity is a fundamental human right, and that the goal is to ensure that each of the approximately 8 billion people on Earth has a verifiable and portable identity. It sounds noble, but consider what this means in practice. A system where every human being is catalogued, registered, and traceable in a global database. But has there ever been a time in history when a universal identification system was used to separate those who had rights from those who did not? Has there ever been a moment when a number, a mark, a record on a person's body determined whether they could live normally or would be excluded from everything? If digital money is the blood of the system and digital identity is the skeleton, then social credit is the brain. It is what decides who deserves to participate and who must be punished. And the most advanced and frightening example of this is, once again, in China. The Chinese social credit system officially began in 2014, when the State Council published a document called Planning for the Construction of a Social Credit System. The declared objective was to build a culture of sincerity and punish the breach of trust. In practice, it works like this. Each citizen and each company receives a score based on their behavior. Paying bills on time increases your score. Donating to charity increases it. Taking good care of elderly parents increases it. But crossing the street outside the crosswalk decreases it. Throwing trash on the ground decreases it. Posting criticisms of the government on social media decreases it. Associating with people who have low scores, that's right, association by proximity, also decreases it. And what are the consequences of a low score? They are devastating. By 2023, the system had already prevented more than 35 million purchases of airline tickets and more than 6 million purchases of high-speed train tickets. People with low scores were prevented from enrolling children in private schools. They were excluded from certain public jobs. They had their internet speed reduced. They were prevented from renting real estate in certain areas. In some districts, the faces of dishonest debtors are displayed on public screens in the streets, a digital version of the medieval pillory. 35 million flights denied, and the technical structure behind all this is monumental. China has more than 626 million surveillance cameras installed, the largest monitoring system on the planet. This equates to approximately 1 camera for every 2 inhabitants. Many of these cameras are equipped with facial recognition, powered by artificial intelligence capable of identifying a person in a database of more than 1 billion faces in less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds, the time it takes you to blink twice. In that interval, the system already knows who you are, where you are, and can cross-reference that information with your social credit history, your financial records, your medical records, and your social media posts. And do not think that this will be restricted to China. In 2024, the city of Bologna in Italy announced a pilot project called the Virtuous Citizenship Card, a scoring system that rewards citizens who separate trash correctly, use public transport, and reduce energy consumption. Cities in Germany, Austria, and Canada are testing similar programs. In the United States, insurers already adjust prices based on behavior data collected by apps and wearable devices. The financial credit score, the famous score, has already functioned for decades as a primitive version of social credit. A number that decides if you deserve a loan, a rental, or a credit card. What China did was simply expand this concept to every area of human life, and the rest of the world is following the path, only with different names and more palatable packaging. Now, remember what Revelation says about the location of the mark? In their right hand or in their foreheads. Not in the wallet, not in the pocket, on the body. And it is here that the narrative takes a leap that makes the stomach churn. In 2015, the Swedish company Biohacks International began implanting subcutaneous microchips in employees of companies in Sweden. The chip, the size of a grain of rice, approximately 12 millimeters in length and 2 millimeters in diameter, is inserted into the membrane between the thumb and the index finger of the hand. After the procedure, which lasts about 10 seconds and costs on average €100, the person can open doors, log into computers, pay for coffee in the canteen, and access public transport, all with a wave of the hand, without a wallet, without a key, without a cell phone. In Sweden, more than 6,000 people have already implanted these chips voluntarily. The state railway company SJ allows passengers with implants to board trains without a ticket. The chip is read by a scanner on the wrist, and the fare is automatically deducted from the linked account. Co-working centers in Stockholm use the chip as an access key. Gyms accept it as a membership card. Hospitals are testing its use to store emergency medical data accessible by health professionals. And the technology is evolving at an alarming speed. Neuralink, the company founded by Elon Musk, implanted its first brain chip in a human being in January of 2024. The device, called N1, has 1,024 electrodes, wires thinner than a human hair, inserted directly into the cerebral cortex. The declared objective is to treat paralysis and neurological diseases. But the company itself has already stated that, in the future, the interface will allow direct communication between the human brain and computers, smartphones, and digital systems. In the forehead, or more precisely inside it, inside the brain. In 2024, the Swiss-American company DS-Ruptive Subdermals presented the first subcutaneous implant with payment functionality approved for commercial use in Europe. The chip allows contactless transactions using the NFC protocol, the same technology as the contactless card. The user brings their hand close to a payment terminal, and the purchase is made. No limit of use. No battery to recharge. The chip works indefinitely because it is powered by the electromagnetic energy of the payment terminal itself at the moment of the transaction. Now connect the dots. A digital currency controlled by the government in the account, a chip in the hand that allows payment by proximity, a digital identity linked to the chip. A social credit score that determines if the transaction will be approved or denied. Every piece exists. Every piece works. They just have not been connected into a single system yet. The key word is yet. But is all this a coincidence? Is it just natural progress? Or is there an older pattern being followed? A script that was already written before any of these technologies existed? To answer this, we need to step back. Far back. We need to return to the beginning, because the mark of the beast does not appear out of nowhere in chapter 13 of Revelation. It is the culminating point of a pattern that the Bible documents from the first chapters of Genesis. The first biblical record of a centralized system of human power trying to replace the sovereignty of God is the Tower of Babel, described in Genesis 11. The text says that the inhabitants of the earth, all speaking a single language, decided to build a city and a tower whose top would reach the heavens, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Observe the three layers: geographical centralization, linguistic unification, and a collective project whose motivation was human self-sufficiency. The result was the direct intervention of God, who confounded the languages and dispersed the peoples. The message was clear. Total centralization under human control is not just ambition, it is rebellion. The pattern repeats in Exodus when the Pharaoh of Egypt built a system where an entire people, the Hebrews, estimated at more than 600,000 adult persons, plus their families, was forced to work, produce, and live under the absolute control of a ruler who declared himself divine. The Hebrews could not buy or sell freely. They could not move without permission. They could not worship their God. And the only form of identification they had was the mark of slavery, the forced labor imprinted on their bodies and in their history. Advance to the book of Daniel, and the pattern becomes even clearer. In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar dreams of a giant statue made of 4 different metals, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, representing 4 empires that would dominate the world in sequence: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Each empire was larger, more comprehensive, and more controlling than the previous one. Each demanded some form of worship or submission to the central power. Nebuchadnezzar erected a gold statue, 27 meters high, and ordered everyone to prostrate themselves before it. Whoever refused would be cast into a burning, fiery furnace, according to Daniel 3. Darius of Medo-Persia issued a decree prohibiting prayers to any god or man other than himself for 30 days. Whoever disobeyed would be cast into the den of lions, according to Daniel 6. Do you perceive the pattern? Each system of power imposes 3 things: economic centralization, mandatory identification, and worship of the system or the leader. The mark of the beast described in Revelation is not a new invention. It is the final culmination, the perfectly technological version, of something that has been tried repeatedly throughout history. Babel tried with bricks, Egypt tried with whips, Babylon tried with a statue, Rome tried with imperial decrees. The final system described by John will try with algorithms, same pattern, different tools, and for the system to work on a global scale, it needs eyes everywhere. This is where the fifth pillar enters, and perhaps the most disturbing of all, surveillance by artificial intelligence. Consider the numbers. In 2024, there were approximately 1 billion surveillance cameras installed in the world. 1 billion. If they were people, they would form the third most populous country on Earth, behind only India and China. Of these, more than 626 million are in China, about 120 million in the United States, and growing numbers in Europe, the Middle East, and Latin America. The consultancy IHS Markit estimated that by 2029, the global number will exceed 2 billion. But cameras alone do not make intelligent surveillance. What transforms a camera into an instrument of control is the artificial intelligence behind it. Facial recognition systems, such as those developed by the Chinese companies Megvii, SenseTime, and Hikvision, can process more than 300 million faces per second. Clearview AI, an American company, built a database with more than 40 billion facial images taken from social networks, news sites, and public records, the equivalent of approximately 5 photos of every person alive on Earth. Any police agency with access to the system can photograph a face and, in seconds, receive the name, address, and history of that person. In China, the system is even deeper. The Sharp Eyes program, launched in 2015, integrates public cameras, traffic cameras, and cameras in commercial establishments into a single network monitored by artificial intelligence. In cities like Chongqing, which has 32 million inhabitants, more than many entire countries, the system automatically identifies traffic infractions, recognizes fugitives, detects behaviors considered suspicious, and sends real-time alerts to the authorities. In Xinjiang, a region where the Uyghur Muslim minority suffers massive surveillance, cameras with facial recognition are positioned every 100 meters in some urban areas. Residents are required to install monitoring apps on their cell phones. Biometric checkpoints, where fingerprints, irises, and facial data are collected, exist at gas stations, shopping malls, and mosques. And here a question arises that few people ask. If all this surveillance apparatus already exists to monitor behavior and impose consequences, what prevents its integration with a digital payment system and a biometric identity? Technically, absolutely nothing. But we do not need to imagine what the convergence of all these systems would be like. We have already had a dress rehearsal, and it has a name, the health passport. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world in 2020, governments implemented in record time what years of debate on digital privacy had never allowed. Mandatory digital documents that determined whether a person could or could not access basic services. In France, the pass sanitaire was required to enter restaurants, cinemas, long-distance trains, and even hospitals for non-emergency visits. In Italy, the green pass was mandatory for work. Without it, the worker was suspended without pay. In Israel, the green passport defined who could frequent gyms, hotels, and cultural events. In Australia, states like Victoria and New South Wales implemented digital check-in apps that track the location of each citizen in real time, linked to vaccination status. The numbers reveal the scale. In the European Union, more than 590 million digital certificates were issued in less than 12 months. In Brazil, the Conectesas app was downloaded more than 140 million times. In China, the Health Code, the same one used to prevent depositors from protesting in Henan, was consulted more than 9 billion times in a single year. 9 billion verifications. In a country of 1,400,000,000 inhabitants, this meant that each person was verified, on average, more than 6 times a day. What happened to those who did not have the pass? They could not enter supermarkets in some jurisdictions. They could not take public transport. They could not work. They could not travel. In some cases, they could not even access health services, which would be ironic if it were not tragic. People were fired. Families were separated at borders. Elderly people in homes were prevented from receiving visits from children and grandchildren. The digital pass divided entire societies into 2 categories, the compliant and the excluded. And notice a crucial detail. All this was implemented in a matter of weeks, not months, not years, weeks. The infrastructure already existed, the technology was already ready. It only took a crisis, real or perceived, for the switch to be flipped. And when the crisis passed, the infrastructure was not dismantled. In many countries, the apps were adapted to become permanent digital identity wallets. The Health Pass was the beta test. The final product is still being prepared. And who is coordinating this final product? To understand this, it is necessary to look at organizations that operate above national governments. The World Economic Forum, based in Davos, Switzerland, published in 2020 what it called the Great Reset. The document proposes a complete restructuring of global economic, social and technological systems. Among the central proposals, digital currencies, universal digital identities, tracking of individual carbon emissions, and what they call stakeholder capitalism, a model where companies and governments act in an integrated way to shape social behavior. Klaus Schwab himself, founder of the Forum, wrote in his book published in 2020 that the pandemic represented a window of opportunity to reshape the world. These are not the words of a marginal theorist. They are from a man who annually gathers the leaders of the largest governments, banks and corporations on the planet. More than 3,000 leaders from 130 countries participated in the Davos meeting in 2024, and the agenda included exactly the themes we have described: digital currency, digital identity, artificial intelligence, and global governance. So it is not a conspiracy hidden in the shadows. It is an agenda declared publicly, funded by billions of dollars, supported by the largest institutions in the world, and being implemented step by step before our eyes. The difference between a conspiracy and an agenda is simple. A conspiracy is secret. An agenda has a website, an annual report, and a press conference. There is still a layer that most people do not even perceive. The objects around us are also watching. The so-called Internet of Things, IoT, connected more than 16 billion devices to the Internet in 2024. They are refrigerators that monitor what you eat, watches that record your heartbeats, sleep patterns, and stress level, voice assistants that listen to conversations inside the house, televisions that track what you watch, cars that record every journey with centimeter precision via GPS, robotic vacuum cleaners that map the floor plan of your house and send these data to cloud servers. Amazon, for example, recorded more than 8 billion interactions with Alexa in 2023 alone. Every question asked, every command given, every song played, all stored. Ring, also from Amazon, operates more than 20 million home security cameras in the United States, creating a private surveillance network that has already been accessed by police departments more than 3,400 times in a single year without a judicial warrant. Google records the location of more than 2 billion Android devices every few minutes. Facebook, today Meta, collects on average more than 52,000 data points per user. 52,000 data points about you. Each of these systems, individually, seems inoffensive. A smart refrigerator is convenient. A watch that monitors health is useful. A voice assistant that turns on the house lights is comfortable. But when all these data converge into a single profile linked to a digital identity and a programmable money account, the result is something that no dictator in history ever had at his disposal: total knowledge and absolute control over the life of each individual. But all this still sounds abstract, doesn't it? So let's talk about what happens to real people when this type of system is activated against them. Because the human cost is already measurable. It already has faces. It already has names. In China, journalist Liu Hu, who investigated cases of corruption, was included in the blacklist of the social credit system in 2017. He was not arrested. He was not assaulted. He was simply classified as dishonest. From one day to the next, he could no longer buy a plane ticket. He could not get a train ticket. He could not book a hotel. His social media accounts, which had more than 2 million followers, were silenced by algorithms. He was not executed. He was erased. In Henan province, in 2022, depositors of 4 rural banks who demanded access to their own frozen money discovered that their health codes, the app used for COVID control, had mysteriously turned red. Red code meant mandatory quarantine. These people were not sick. They had not been exposed to the virus. The code was altered to prevent them from traveling to the banks and protesting. The health system was deliberately manipulated as a tool of financial and political control. In Canada, in February of 2022, during the truckers' protests against health measures, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in the country's history. Bank accounts of protesters were frozen without a court order. Donors who had contributed amounts as small as $50 had their accounts identified and blocked. Crowdfunding platforms were forced to hand over donor data to the government. People who were not at the protest, but who had made an online donation weeks before, woke up without access to their own money. In Nigeria, when the government launched the Naira and simultaneously restricted the use of physical money in early 2023, limiting ATM withdrawals to only 200,000 Naira per week, the equivalent of approximately $260, the result was chaos. Hours-long lines at banks. Elderly people without cell phones who could not access their resources, small merchants in rural areas without digital infrastructure who were paralyzed. There were violent protests in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. What was presented as financial modernization revealed itself for millions of Nigerians as forced exclusion. And think about what this means for entire communities that live outside digital reach. According to the World Bank, in 2024, approximately 1,400,000,000 adults in the world still did not have a bank account. In sub-Saharan Africa, only 49% of the adult population possesses some form of formal financial account. In Southeast Asia, the proportion is 65%. This means that hundreds of millions of people, the poorest, the most vulnerable, those who live in villages without constant electricity, would be the first to be excluded from a totally digital system. The small that John mentions in Revelation 13, those who have no voice, no power, and no lobby, they are the ones who first feel the weight of a system that demands total participation or nothing. Observe how the structure of exclusion is perfect. There is no violence. There are no concentration camps. There are no soldiers in the streets. There is only an app that does not work, a transaction that is denied, a door that does not open, a life that, from the system's point of view, simply ceases to exist. It is the cleanest tyranny ever conceived, and it is exactly what John described. These cases are not hypothetical. They are documented. They are recent. and they reveal a truth that Revelation 13 describes with surgical precision. The power of the mark is not in causing physical pain. It is in turning off the social and economic existence of a person, without visible violence, without blood, just a click. But there is a dimension of the prophecy that is frequently forgotten in technological analysis, and perhaps it is the most important of all. The mark of the beast is not just an economic mechanism. Revelation 13 verse 15 says that the second beast had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. The key word is worship. Throughout the Bible, the central conflict was never about technology, money, or political power. It was about worship, who or what the human being chooses to place at the center of their life. The original sin in Genesis 3 was not eating a fruit. It was accepting the promise that man could be, as gods, self-sufficient, independent, master of his own destiny. The Tower of Babel was not about architecture. It was about humanity declaring that it did not need God. The plagues of Egypt were not about meteorology. They were about God demonstrating that every Egyptian deity was false, that Pharaoh was not God, and that only he was sovereign. The mark of the beast operates on the same logic. Accepting the mark is not just a practical decision of economic survival. Revelation makes it clear that it is an act of worship to the system and to the leader who controls it. That is why Revelation 14 verses 9 to 11 describes such severe consequences for those who accept it, because it is not about a barcode on the wrist. It is about a spiritual declaration of loyalty, a choice of whom you serve. And it is here that the most uncomfortable question needs to be asked. In a society where you cannot buy food, pay rent, access health, or educate your children without participating in a digital system controlled by the state, what happens to those who refuse? What happens to those who say no? Because Revelation does not speak only of a mark, it speaks also of a seal, and the difference between the two is everything. Revelation 7 verses 3 and 4 describes angels sealing 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel in their foreheads. Revelation 9 verse 4 shows that the locusts of judgment were instructed not to hurt those who had the seal of God in their foreheads. And Revelation 14 verse 1 presents the Lamb, Jesus, on Mount Sion with the 144,000 who had his Father's name written in their foreheads. Observe the parallel. The beast marks in the hand and in the forehead. God seals in the forehead. The mark of the beast gives access to the system of the world. The seal of God gives access to the eternal kingdom. The mark is imposed by economic and social pressure. The seal is received by voluntary choice of faith. One is visible to human systems. The other is visible to heaven. The Bible presents two systems running simultaneously, two kingdoms coexisting, two seals competing for human loyalty, and each person, at some point, will have to choose which one they accept. This is the central structure of Revelation. Not a horror movie, but a choice. What makes this moment in history different from any other is the speed with which all these pieces are converging. We are not talking about an isolated technology. We are talking about a complete ecosystem that is assembling before our eyes. In 2004, Facebook had 1 million users. In 2024, Meta had more than 3,900,000,000 active monthly users on its combined platforms. In 2 decades, a single company went from zero to covering nearly half of humanity. The smartphone, launched in its modern form in 2007 with the first iPhone, reached 5,600,000,000 users in 2024, more than 69% of the world population. Generative artificial intelligence, which was an academic concept in 2020, had more than 100 million users in 2 months after the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022, the fastest adoption of any technology in human history. Each of these platforms is, in practice, an infrastructure of data collection and behavioral control, and all are integrating. Digital identity connects to digital money. Digital money connects to social credit. Social credit connects to camera surveillance. Surveillance connects to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence connects to the devices on your body and in your home. It is like assembling a puzzle in which each piece was manufactured by a different company or government, but all fit perfectly. How long until someone connects all the pieces? How long until a government or an alliance of governments decides that efficiency requires a unified system? How long until the option of not participating simply ceases to exist? Perhaps less than we imagine. It is at this point that many narratives about the mark of the beast stop. In fear, in anxiety, in the feeling that the siege is closing and there is no way out. But the Bible does not stop there. And whoever stops there is reading only half of the book. Revelation is not the book of the end of the world. It is the book of the victory of the Lamb. The same chapter 13 that describes the power of the beast is followed by chapter 14, which opens with Jesus standing on Mount Sion, surrounded by those who refuse the mark. Revelation 15 shows those who had gotten the victory over the beast singing the song of Moses and of the Lamb, the same song of liberation that the Israelites sang after crossing the Red Sea. Revelation 19 describes the beast and the false prophet being cast into the lake of fire. Revelation 20 describes Satan being bound for 1,000 years. And Revelation 21 describes a new heaven and a new earth, where God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. The book that describes the greatest tribulation in human history is the same book that describes the greatest victory. Those who refuse the mark are not portrayed as victims. They are portrayed as victors. It is not defeat to refuse the system. It is the most courageous and consequential decision a human being can make. Look back and perceive the design. Every great system change in the world always came disguised as progress. Babel offered unity. Egypt offered stability. Babylon offered order. Rome offered civilization. Each empire promised security in exchange for submission. Each said that the sacrifice of freedom was temporary. Each said that those who resisted were the problem. The pattern has not changed. Only the tools have changed. Where Babel used bricks, the current system uses servers. Where Egypt used whips, the current system uses algorithms. Where Nebuchadnezzar erected a gold statue, the current system erects digital platforms. Where Rome decreed that Caesar was Lord, the current system suggests that technology is the savior. The structure is identical. Centralization, control, dependence, and in the end, worship of the system that provides everything, or the total exclusion of those who refuse to worship. And this is the point that changes everything, the same God who saw Babel, who opened the Red Sea, who closed the mouths of the lions for Daniel, and who took 3 young men out of a furnace without a singed hair, is the same God who is alive while you read this. The book of Revelation was not written to generate panic. It was written to generate preparation, so that no one is caught by surprise, so that the choice, when it comes, is made with open eyes and a decided heart. The mark of the beast already has a name. It has technology, it has structure, it has defenders, and it has a deadline. But the Lamb also has a name. He has power, he has a promise, and he has no deadline because he is eternal. The same book that describes the mark describes also the throne. And on that throne is not the beast. There is no government. There is no algorithm. On that throne is the Lamb who was slain and who lives forever. And before that throne, every mark loses its value, every system dissolves, and every knee bows. Revelation 1, verse 3 says, "Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand." The time is at hand. The mark has a new name, but the Lamb has the same power, and that is what decides everything.